Disclaimer: if you're not into super ultra esoteric Star Wars lore, you probably won't have any idea of what I'm talking about here, so sorry about that. Anyway, with that out of the way, perhaps one of the most obscure pieces of Star Wars lore ever lies within the pages of a role-playing game magazine published in 1992, specifically Challenge 58, in the article The Battle for Mandalore, which was a game setup for the Star Wars Miniatures Battles tabletop wargame. Now, the status of the magazine's officiality, if that's even a word, there's probably something slipping my mind. Anyway, it's dubious. It's unclear whether the Star Wars articles published by the magazine were licensed by Lucas Licensing, but the fact remains that a number of sources reference these stories, including the Essential Atlas. If Wikipedia sees fit to include it, then I'll take it as having happened. The story goes as follows. 10 soldiers wearing the distinctive gray uniforms of the Republican Army and a half-dozen black-clad Jedi Knights advance cautiously through the deserted, rubble-choked streets of Mandalore. Black smoke hangs heavily in the air. Army Lieutenant Wares matches strides with Voli Quana, Jedi Mistress. "Your soldiers fight with remarkable order," Quana says, "even in these chaotic conditions. The troops are obeying orders which I haven't even given yet," Wares responds. "It's you, isn't it? Doing something to their minds, to all our minds, to keep us disciplined and in high morale. That's why you look so haggard." "The governor is still in the city," Quana says, "but he's preparing to escape in a private spacecraft. He must be tried for crimes against the Republic. I am telepathically relaying all your orders so we may reach him in time. And do not concern yourself with my health, for my ally is the foe." Quana stops, covering her eyes with a hand. "What's wrong?" Wares says. "Halt your troops, Lieutenant, I sense—" Suddenly, a loud blast and the flash of a bright blue beam. An ambush! Wares' chest explodes and his body spins into an alley. Quana's amber-bladed lightsaber is in her hand, ignited, in time to deflect a second blast aimed at her. In the next second, dozens of blue and red blaster bolts intersect the smoky streets, ionizing the air and sending chunks of Formex flying with each near miss. The final battle for Mandalore begins. This adventure is set long before the time period covered in the Star Wars movies. The end of the Old Republic nears. Soon, several skirmishes raging across the galaxy will become Clone Wars. Governor Vrox of Mandalore, a secret supporter of Senator Palpatine, has taken advantage of the galaxy's chaos to become virtual dictator of his planet. Rather than feed his greed by taxing his own people, Vrox has sent the small but potent Mandalorian armed forces to raid neighboring star systems. He is also suspected of the illegal manufacture of war droids. The Senate has dispatched a contingent of Republican Army soldiers and Jedi Knights to the Mandalore systems in a desperate attempt to restore order. After knocking out Mandalore's planetary defenses, Republican forces began a ground assault rather than rely on planetary bombardment. They wished to minimize civilian casualties and damage to the capital city. Vrox, however, did not hesitate to use artillery strikes against Republican forces within the city once the battle swung against him. Before the artillery was silenced, these strikes caused the most damage and deaths in the capital city. Now, the battle is nearly over. Most of the Mandalorian soldiers have been routed. Governor Vrox fled his fortress estate before it was assaulted and is preparing to escape in his private star yacht. He charges a squad of his elite Mandalorian commandos with delaying Republican troops while he prepares to lift off. I won't read the rest of it, as the rest is mostly just stuff to set up the game, but I'll leave it on screen for now so you can see it. The important story information in those following pages are just the setting, the fact that the Republic was victorious, and the statement that Boba Fett and a few other Mandalorian commandos were the only survivors of the opposition. An obvious reference to his original backstory from the Marvel Comics, which has since been retconned heavily. Now, it's rather obvious to most fans that know the lore well that there are a ton of details that conflict heavily with later media. How do we reconcile the drastic differences in the lore presented here with the material that has come since, and tie it all together? I think it's rather simple, and ties in well with another Mandalorian conflict that has little material on it. the Great Clan Wars. Said conflict's details were an attempt by writers to try to rectify the massive continuity screw-ups that the Clone Wars show created in regards to Mandalorian society. To put it briefly, the basics of it are that following the Mandalorian Civil War, clan disputes spiraled into full-scale battles that devastated much of the Mandalore sector. The intervention of the Jedi Order led to the resurgence and prevalence of the aristocratic pacifist New Mandalorian faction, led by Duchess Satine Kryze. They would then proceed to exile numerous enemy groups like the Death Watch. Of course, the New Mandalorians are the successors of the puppet government set up by the Republic after the Mandalorian excision, and spit in the face of everything it means to be a Mandalorian, but that's a topic for another day. In my headcanon, I think that some people view the Great Clan Wars as simply a continuation of the Mandalorian Civil War, which would actually fix the conflicting claims on whether it was, quote-unquote, a sectarian feud irrelevant to most Mandoade lives, as claimed by Jang Skirata in Legacy of the Forced Sacrifice, or a conflict that nearly destroyed their entire society, as claimed in The History of the Mandalorians, written by Abel G. Pena. So, why do I think the Battle for Mandalore is the culmination of the Great Clan Wars? Well, I have a decent bit of evidence for that. First, the timeline. All we know for when the Battle for Mandalore took place is that it was prior to 32 BBY, i.e. the Phantom Menace. The end date for the Great Clan Wars is stated to be the very same, with the beginning date being circa 44 BBY, which also happens to be the year the Mandalorian Civil War ended. Now, Vrox's title of governor seems to fit the aristocratic New Mandalorian society a lot more than that of the traditional Mandoade, in which titles correspond to a position within a clan, such as chieftain. Vrox also tended to escape the battle aboard a star yacht. The coronet, Satine's personal craft, has been called the same classification. Perhaps it's the very same ship. Now, the presence of civilians somewhat complicates things. It's been stated that the entire population of Mandalore basically becomes a militia in wartime, so their being there is a bit of a lore screw-up. Unless, of course, the setting is the new Mandalorian capital of Sundari, as opposed to the traditional capital of the planet Keldabe. The presence of Jedi, in the form of Voli Quana and 5 others, I think adds further evidence to my hypothesis, as we know both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were involved, so why wouldn't more be present? Also, the mention of specifically avoiding orbital bombardment recalls the fact that that was precisely what happened during the Mandalorian excision, and the Jedi would likely want to avoid a repeat of that, especially in the era where Master Yoda was the Grand Master. Now, the main thing to be rectified to fit into the established legends, whatever, it's the existence of the quote-unquote Republican Army, in an era where the Republic specifically does not have a military, but I think it's a rather easy fix. I think they're just simply the Republic Judicial Forces. Well, actually, scratch that, there's also the presence of Boba Fett to deal with. Again, this is a clear reference to the old Marvel Star Wars comics, with his original backstory retconned having been the clone Alpha Theta 2. The basics of that story were also changed having happened on Norval 2, not Mandalore, and having happened in 19 BBY, so that's out the window. Wikipedia simply ignores Fett's presence there, and so will I. Basically, again, sum it all up, in my headcanon, I think Governor Vrox and his Mandalorian armed forces were among the combatants of the Great Clan Wars, and his capture marked the end of the conflict. Retur Shemi Vode, and thanks for watching.